It's broadcast live. Randy Coleman, let me know you can hear me. I'm no longer frozen in time, which may or may not be a good thing for some of you. Anyway, assuming we're live again, sorry about that. We had a little technical glitch. Thank you, Ian, for sorting that out. So back for another conversation with me and a guest of mine. We're going to talk to Randall Grahm tonight, and I would imagine that every one of you know who that is. And since I've started doing this Friday night thing, just about everybody has asked, when are you going to speak to Randall Grahm? When are you going to speak to Randall Grahm? So I wasn't entirely sure Randall Grahm would want to participate in this, and he's such an iconic personality and moderately intimidating in his knowledge and intelligence that I wanted to practice a little bit before I even asked him. And I asked him, of course, gracious as always, he agreed to do this. And I know Randall fairly well, but not incredibly well. The first time that I saw and listened to Randall Grahm in person was somewhere in the early 90s in a restaurant in Paso Robles, used to be called Boozy's, and he was doing a Bonnie Doon dinner. And I was pretty new in the business and, of course, knew of him and wanted to go hear him for myself. And I honestly don't remember a whole lot from that dinner, but the thing I do remember is he poured an unlabeled Magnum that night, which he introduced by saying, to quote Alice Cooper, "Welcome to my nightmare," and it was a Nebbiolo. And it really got my attention. And as of 1999 or 2000, somewhere in there, which is as soon as I could find Nebbiolo in our area, I have been making one, totally inspired by that evening. And it is tough to work with, and I don't know that I've ever achieved what I tasted that night, but I think we do a pretty good job. And over the years, I've run into Randall. I spilled a glass of red wine all over him in Bordeaux. I've had many conversations at many tastings with him and visited him, spent a day driving around Paso Robles tasting Mourvedre and his great old Citroen DS, which was always a favorite car of mine. So that was exciting. So lots of meetings and time, but mostly tastings where we don't get to sit down and talk to each other in great depth. And he's done so much of interest and so much that has influenced our industry over the years, and we'll touch on some of that. But I think more importantly to me, is what he's doing today and what he's changing and what avenues he's charging down at the moment. So we're going to taste some wines. We're going to taste some, of course, a couple of Tables Creek and a couple of Randalls, and we'll talk about those when we get to them. But let's see if we can bring Randall in and get this show on the road.
Hey there.
He is indeed. Hey, Randall, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Neil.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do it. I know you're a busy fella. Do you remember that Magnum of Nebbiolo that I was just talking about?
I do. Yes, I remember that dinner as well in Paso years ago.
Where was that Nebbiolo from?
That was from my vineyard in Soledad. That was grown in Soledad, California, of all places. Okay. Miserable place to grow grapes, but
it turned out. I don't remember the wine really very well, but I remember walking away from there saying, I'm going to make Nebbiolo. So you at least sent me down the wrong path. So, I mean, everybody knows you from Bonnie Doon, of course, the one of, if not the original, Rhone Ranger and Cigar Volant and all of those other things you did, the Big House Red and the Pacific Rim Riesling. I forget what that was called with the fisherman label.
Il Pescatore.
There it was. And so on and so on. And maybe we should talk that a little bit before we go any further. I mean, I know and many people know, but why? Why did Randall Grahm dive into Rhones to begin with, the Cigar Volant? When was the first vintage of Cigar?
First vintage of Cigar was 1984. And really it was a improvisational move. It was I called it an audible because I was in my intention was to make Pinot Noir. The problem is I had a vineyard of Pinot Noir that was not very good. So when your home vineyard is crap, you've got a big problem. You have a need for a reset. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to be spending a little time with Kermit Lynch back in those days, And I had a very simplistic hypothesis that maybe Rhone varieties would do well in California. In retrospect, it's quite obvious, but at the time it was not quite as obvious because nobody had made a red Grenache, for example, and Syrah was all pretty junky back then. Few people knew that Mourvèdre even existed in California, so we didn't really know what the potential was. In principle, it should work, but no one had ever really sort of put it together, at least in modern times.
84 was the year I came to California on vacation and never went home. So it's an auspicious year for me, for sure. And you were one of very few at that time, right? I mean, I don't remember the dates, but I imagine Bob Linquist was just sniffing around it, and Steve Edmonds was there, and maybe Terre Rouge, Bill Eastman.
Easton was maybe a year later, but he was early as well, yeah.
And did you guys fraternize, or were you just independently doing your own thing?
Well, we fraternized. We were not very organized group. We were all pretty anarchistic and individualist. So, the idea of an organization or an association was, we're all hippies in one form or another as well. So organization was not our strong suit, but we just sort of came together on an ad hoc basis to form the Rhone Rangers.
But you did
spontaneous.
Well, you hung out and tasted and had the same vision, it seems. I mean, and all still doing great stuff. I mean, I had Steve Edmonds, which was super because I've never really spent a lot of time with Steve, and we did one of these things. I got to hang out with him for an hour, and it was such a cool guy. And I love the way he went a different direction for me. He stuck to being very small and doing his thing, and I can appreciate that as well.
His wines are really underrated and underappreciated, and
I agree.
Not as well known as they should be.
Yeah, and he seems to be happy doing his thing. I mean, we'd all be happier if our wine sold more easily, I suppose. But
yes.
There it is. I mean, but many things you've done. I mean, I remember, people always tell me you're crazy, and maybe you are a little bit, but you've always been one to push the envelope where it needed to be pushed, it seems. I remember the death of the cork business, and when you went all to synthetic corks and then moved to screw cap. And my family business is 100% screw cap, so I agree with you on that front. But kind of brave things to do. You've never been shy to go out there on a limb and say your piece, right? And do it. Follow up with action.
I'm just looking for attention, Neil. That's all.
Not really believing that. So
anyways.
So clear up a little bit of mystery for me. Like, what is going on with Bonnie Do now? I mean, it's still you, but it's not all you. It's
complicated. Well, I sold the company about a little over a year ago, and I'm sort of hanging around on a kind of consultancy basis. I'm still involved in the winemaking, but I've really left the day-to-day winemaking to my colleague Nicole, who you recall, of course.
Nicole still run it with you up there. That's great.
Yeah,
she's great.
Indeed.
And she's been able to hang in there with you for what, a long time now.
I think it's about 18 years, so it's
wow.
been a while. Yeah.
She's a little defective somewhere then, because chasing the many ideas of Randall Grahm. I remember so many things. The Demi-Jaune Cigar Volant, which to anyone else would be unthinkable. Are you still doing that?
Well, at the moment, I'm not, but I reserve the right to revisit it. It's a very powerful technology, and it needs to be used for good, not for evil. And honestly, like many things in my winemaking career, I often feel like the sorcerer's apprentice. And in the case of the demi-jaunes of the bonbon, it's a super powerful technology, but you need to master it lest it master you. So I'm still getting a handle on how to use it most effectively, but it's powerful.
Do you feel that it was mastering you a little bit, so you had to take a step back?
Yes, indeed. We've used it on red, white, and pink, and I think I've had, strangely, the best success with pink. But it has to be done very precisely, and again, I'm still learning how to master it. I don't think I have it under control entirely as yet.
You may never have that under control, I suspect.
That's true.
So, being the Grandmaster Roan guy, what are your feelings of where it's come since 1984? Because it's a very different picture now.
Yeah, honestly, Neil, I'm very ambivalent. You know, it's like you know, on Saturday Night Live they say, you know, the Rhone has been very, very good to me. The Rhone
Hmm.
Rangers have been very, very good to me, and it's fantastic. But I think we Rhone Rangers need to find our own identity. We have to somehow define ourselves through what we do originally rather than referentially. So in other words, I think that's the tragic flaw is being a wannabe or perceived as a copycat. I think we need to really think about what are the things we can do that are truly original in California that they can't be done in the Rhone. You know, what are the styles, what are the techniques, what are the methodologies that we can potentially do uniquely.
So we got the concept from realizing the climates and the land, et cetera, were similar to them. Copied what they did a little bit, and now we need to be free and evolve that in a California way.
Correct. I think.
And where does that go? I mean, I'd hate to see that be translated as overripe and too much sunshine, but I agree with you. I think you're right. I think it is, but that's a long course, isn't it, to find your own self in a winemaking sense, because it takes so long, as you as well as anyone knows, to plant a vineyard, make a couple of vintages, and realize you were wrong. Right? That's a long road.
You got to start out as a young man, that's for sure. It's a young person's game, that's for sure.
Yeah, to start from fresh, and we don't learn, as Jean-Pierre Perrin once said to me, we learn about this much every year, and we hope that we may get to use it again in another year. You know, it's a long game. So obviously, you know, Talbot's Creek came to town, and you were a big part of that consultation, I would imagine. I've spoken with Bob about it a lot. They came, visited you, and gave them your direction. How do you think? You know, you must have met them long before they bought the land and talked about where they should buy. I'm sure Pastor Opals was probably a bit of a surprise to you, as it was to everybody. But what's your feeling about how that evolved over time? And you're always honest, so.
Yeah, no, I think it was an inspired choice. I mean, I think there could have been other places where it could have worked as well. What's interesting about your situation is the geology. The soil itself is quite interesting. So that's a big part of the story. And I mean, I really climate is important, but I think geology is equally important. So I think the problem in California is trying to have it all. It's very difficult to have it all, and also very difficult to find land that's affordable and large enough scale to do something of scale. So I think Paso was an inspired choice. I mean, Paso's got its issues. It's bloody darn hot, as you probably have figured out.
Yeah, it's
So
19 degrees yesterday.
yikes. Yeah. So that's the issue. I mean, I think Mourvèdre is potentially brilliant in Paso. I think Syrah is more challenging. I think Syrah is more challenging almost anywhere in the world these days. Climate change has not been very gentle with Syrah, alas.
I think from what I've seen, the climate change is even more brutal for the Rhone than it is for us here. I mean, they're really feeling it. I mean, dramatically. I think it's interesting to see what they do to handle that.
Yes, Provence and the Bouches du Rhône, Côte du Rhône are just getting hammered. I mean, and without irrigation, without benefit of irrigation, they're really in a world of hurt.
I think I hear whispers that they are petitioning to be able to irrigate the whites in Chateauneuf. I don't know whether that will be allowed. I'm sure there's both sides of that argument, traditionalist and realist, that it is changing and it is time to make some changes there.
It's inevitable. They will irrigate soon.
Yeah, which is It is what it is. I love the dry farming. I think it's the purest of pure expressions, but it doesn't do any good if the vine's dead, right? So I tend to forget to taste the wine. So let's do that. We pulled the Bourbon for you. We poured the Bourbon for you to try tonight. Our first vintage, and I'll tell you something about it, just so you know. You've noticed that the color is dark, let's say, and I was a little surprised at that when we picked it. It was first pick off of that section of vineyard. It's only about 1,000 vines. It's propagation block, but it's planted on some of the most laid bare limestone that we have, so the sun bouncing off it. I think a thin canopy. I think we suffered from a little sun exposure, and so the color got a little darker. In 2020, the color is much paler. But getting beyond that, I'm really pretty excited about it. I know that Robert Haas, it was one that he never got to see the wine from, but it was one that he was most excited about. So, what's your take on it? Give us a little round.
The chalkiness, and I know that chalk doesn't actually literally translate from soil to nose, but there's a chalkiness to the wine which I rather like. I like the lightness of body. It's refreshing. I'd like to see maybe a little more acidity, but I always want to see a little more acidity.
There is more acidity in 2020 for sure. As I say, this got a bit battered by the sunshine, which is tough on it's kind of a southwest facing limestone hillside, and it's a great piece of land, but when the vines are young, it takes a bit getting used to for them. Fortunately,
you could put netting, just sheet cloth.
In the next vintage, we just had more canopy, and it really helped. It really helped. We did play with shade cloth in other areas. I don't know. It just seems an unnatural choice to me, and it's so much plastic netting in my vineyard that then goes where I don't know. So I'm doing a trial with a new block we're planting, and I'm doing vertical cordon Syrah, and then low prune head train Grenache in alternating rows to try and use the Syrah to help shade the Grenache. So we'll see how that works out. Trying to make them work together. Which Syrah and Grenache work together in general, I think. So let's have a look at your white wine. No, before we get there. So all your incredible history and all the stuff you've done and how well we all know you and your products, et cetera, and they are infinite different wines, et cetera. But in recent years, and you'll have to give me the date, is the San Benito project, Population, I believe you call it.
Yeah.
And what's going on with that? Because that now is a whole nother avenue for you, and it's a whole nother level of going out there and doing stuff that to some of us may seem a little bit bizarre.
Correct. The Population project, some elements of it are quite rational. Some of them are slightly irrational. There are some
rational ones as well as the irrational ones, or is there
more or less the rational part? This is a conventional grape variety. We're trying to grow it we're trying to dry farm it, which is kind of crazy in San Benito County, it gets about 12 inches of rain in a good year. This year we got 5 inches of rain.
There's some pretty good dry farm stuff out there, though, right down. I've never been to the vineyard, but I'm assuming you're north of the Hollister area, Piscinus and all that, right?
North of Piscinus, west of Hollister, about 8 miles west of Hollister.
Okay. So a little more towards the coast.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful countryside.
It is indeed. So yeah, this is semi-rational. This was put through malolactic. This was barrel fermented. Actually, this was fermented in an egg. We had 2 eggs. You need to break a couple of eggs to make a Grenache Blanc. Anyway, yeah. So this was the better egg, as it were, and we put it through malolactic and bottled it without filtration. And it's a sort of pretty minimally handled wine.
100% Grenache Blanc.
No, it's actually half Grenache Blanc, about 45% Grenache Blanc, and about 45 Grenache Gris. So Grenache Blanc, Grenache Gris.
And when you say an egg, I'm assuming it's a concrete egg?
Concrete egg, correct.
It's beautiful. It's a great nose.
The nose is pretty discreet. I'd like to see maybe a little more opulence in the nose, but I love the texture of the wine and the persistence of the wine. I think this wine is going to live for many, 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 many years.
I haven't found Grenache Blanc to be that opulent of a nose in general. I like it though. I like its austerity, and I love the texture of Grenache Blanc. That's one of my favorite white wine textures. It has that tannic kind of feel to it, bite to it, which I always really dig. So I'm assuming, it being you, that this is all organically farmed and biodynamically farmed?
Mm-hmm. That's correct, yes.
And how many acres is the Poplachum property?
Well, the property itself is quite large. The number of acres planted is quite small. The property is about a little over 400 acres, which is huge, but which we can plant probably without clearing trees and doing a lot of damage. We could plant probably about 75, 80 acres altogether. Okay. We planted about 15 so far, a little under 15. Olives, fruit trees, and other stuff.
What is the name? What does that mean? What is Poplachum?
Poplachum is from the Mutsun tribe, which is the local tribe in the Central Coast, San Benito County in Santa Cruz. It's a offshoot of the Ohlone tribe, and Poplachum was the name of the settlement around San Juan Bautista, but the alternate translation is paradise, and it is truly a kind of paradise. It's a very special place. It really is.
And how did you find it?
Well, I'm not particularly a new agey kind of person, but I actually dreamt about this, Neil, and then I went on many realtor dates looking for land. After I sold Big House, I had for like 3 nanoseconds, I had a little bit of cash to spend. And yeah, anyhow, so for that brief period, I looked at a lot of places, mostly within about a 2-hour radius of Santa Cruz. And when I saw this property, I realized I had dreamt about it. And that seemed to be a pretty interesting confirmation.
You didn't go there because you had a dream. You went there and realized you'd already been there.
Correct. Yes.
And you're telling me you're not a new agey guy. Come on.
I know, it's hard to believe.
It is. And what was the attraction apart from the dream? What was the attraction of the property? What are the soils like there?
Well, the soils are extremely diverse. It's right next to 2 major faults, including the San Andreas. The San Andreas fault actually borders the property on one side, on the north side. So we have some very cool geology. We have a lot of limestone soils from the Gavilan Range, some volcanic soils, some granitic soils, and some kind of esoteric clay soils, and then some more prosaic soils as well. So there's some very distinctive, strong terroir, and then some kind of less distinctive ones as well.
So Calera would be down in that area too, right? Josh Jensen, and there's some great vineyard limestone soils in that world. Okay, so got the soils, about 11 inches of rainfall, not as hot as what does that say? I love the wine. The process goes, and what process goes? This is my son who's asking this question. Says at least we've got one viewer, even if it's only because it's his father talking to Randall Grahm. So what was the process that goes into vinification?
Oh, I didn't say specifically. This is whole cluster press. One of the issues we have with this wine is that the pH tends to be so low. So I've not been a real skin contact kind of guy, frankly, for most of my winemaking career. But for the first time in many years, I'm actually thinking about a little skin contact for this particular wine.
Based on the Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris, particularly those grape varieties?
Well, trying to enhance the aromatics a little bit, get a little more weight, and frankly, get the pH up a little bit. So it's more lactic.
It's a problem that I don't suffer from. So climate-wise, not as hot as Paso Robles. Still some wind, I imagine, coming in through there of a night.
It's quite windy. It's quite cold at night. It's very similar climatically to the Roussillon. That's probably the place in France that's closest climatically. So warm days, cold nights, windy afternoons, cold winter. Not as cold as Roussillon in the winter, but quite cold.
So it would seem to me, buying this piece of property, having the vast experience that you have and all the successes and failures that have come with that, it's the perfect opportunity for you to implement what you were saying earlier, as far as it's time for us to break away from copying and do our own thing.
And make a one place.
What was in your head? I'm going to buy this 400 acres. It's perfect soils. It's a great climate. I'm going to make an oaky Syrah. I mean, what was in your
frankly, candidly, I was a little bit confused at first because I thought I was still in love with Pinot Noir, and this was an obsession. But I'm over it. I'm like now totally over it.
We're all in love with Pinot Noir, Randall. Some of us have to accept eventually we just can't have it.
I know. I'm there. I've totally accepted it. But I've always wanted to make a wine of place, and I was always just too chicken shit to attempt to do it because it just seemed too difficult, and I thought I would fail, and because it's really hard. And just because something is difficult is not a reason not to try it. So the problem, of course, is finding a methodology. You know, how do you start to make it's great to say, I'm going to make a wine of place. Fantastic. Great. Knock yourself out. Now what? What does that mean specifically? So how do you do it? And how do you do it in an original fashion? Because whatever you pick is going to be less congruent to the site than somewhere else where it's been grown historically. You're not going to have the same degree. If you grow Pinot, it's not going to be as congruent as Burgundy. You grow Syrah, it's not going to be as congruent as it is in Côte Rôtie. So how do you avoid making sort of a imperfect facsimile copy? I think you have to just open your mind to just a different methodology and think about wines in a just totally different way, which is what I'm attempting to do. And I'm either on the right track or completely off the rails. I don't yet know.
And when did you purchase the property?
I purchased the property. I think it's been about 8 or 9 years ago now.
Okay. You said something earlier I forget what we were talking about, but most properties regions don't have it all. And, it makes you think, like, is that what's special about somewhere like Burgundy, which just has everything and everything's in the right place and it works for those varieties so well? And I mean, that was obviously time for them to figure that out. So how do we go about buying a piece of property in San Juan and San Benito, and then what do you plant there? What was the first grape variety when you walked on that property? Did you think, or once you've done your research on that property, obviously before you bought it, this is going to be the perfect site for Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris? Well,
we started conservatively with Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris because Roussillon, the climate is so similar to Roussillon and Grenache.
So you look to France for like, okay, what are we similar to get a foothold?
Yeah. So that was the foothold, and now the question, and so Grenache seems to really like it in San Juan Bautista. It really likes it there a lot. Syrah, don't yet really know yet how much it loves. So we're doing some other things, Neil, to push the vines in the direction of congruity. So in other words, I didn't really explain the sort of scope of the whole project. So we're doing basically 3 things at Publishing. We're growing sort of conventional grape varieties like Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris and Ruquet, a very esoteric Piemontese grape, Rosé, also another kooky grape. But then we're doing 2 other things that are I think quite significant. One is what I call varietal auto tuning, which is to say we start with a grape. It's kind of a goofy term, but we start with a grape that we think does well, And then we try to figure out how to make it more perfectly matched to the site by allowing it to self-cross and observing the variability. So it's essentially selection massal on steroids, if you will. You're increasing the variability. Most of the variability that you're creating is less than salutary. It's actually detrimental. It's less interesting than the parents. But you're creating a small percentage of biotypes that are potentially more interesting, or at least better suited to the site than the parent.
And how are you accomplishing this?
You allow the grapes to do what comes naturally, which is to self-pollinate. And you take the seeds, extract the seeds, germinate them in the nursery, and then plant them out in your nursery, and then observe and try to make sure that gophers don't eat them all, which is a bit of
good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's reminds me of my views on I have my hand in a little apple cider over the years, and people often, I look at what are cider apples, and I think it's kind of what you're talking about happened, but it was naturally, they would make cider and throw the seeds in a pile, and things would pop up, and over time certain trees grew, and they were good for nothing as far as eating or culinary, and so people made cider from them, and they selected those that were best from a natural selection of seeds coming from apples, which sounds similar to what you're doing, but what a long process that's going to be, I would suppose.
Well, it turns out I started this process thinking I was going to do one thing, and I've kind of recently come to another conclusion that the process itself is quite interesting, but there's potentially another more interesting output, as interesting an outcome or direction to take it, which is to think about it this way. Instead of thinking about trying to find the perfect grape variety, the one that's better suited, that's the alpha omega, just the ultimate variety for your site. And you might find something interesting, and that's great if you do. But the other way of thinking about it is, what do you achieve? What are you achieving potentially by creating all this genetic diversity? Are you creating you're creating the potential for increased complexity and nuance and distinctiveness? So, for example, with a Syrah grape or a serene grape that we're using, I'm looking for the ones that are the uber serenes, that are very typical serene, but I'm also looking for the strange ones, the ones that are weird, the pink ones, the white ones, the ones that are off type, the ones that smell strangely different, the ones that smell like violets, and obviously the ones that are peppery are quite interesting as well. So in other words, by finding 4 or 5 or 6 of really kooky, distinctive ones, I'm deconstructing, if you will, the serene genome and reconstructing it. So in other words, what I'm hypothesizing is that potentially there's more complexity on found in a number of different biotypes than you can achieve in a single biotype. So in other words, I'm sort of reimagining varietal wines as blends, but blends of similar genetic material.
So simplistically, creating a field blend from grapes of the same variety that you've propagated the seeds from there. So it's all from serene, but in all its forms and all its offspring, and It could be terrible, but it could be incredibly complex and intricate, one would think.
Yep.
And how's that going?
Well, some things are going really well. I was very excited last year to find a seedless serene. I was super excited. Tiny little clusters, tiny little berries. Stupidly, I did not make cuttings of it in time, and the gopher got it and killed it, and the vine, anyways, was not useful for propagation. So I'm hoping it'll happen again, but that was very disappointing. I found a lot of white grapes, white varieties coming up, which is interesting as well. Because as you know, Syrah is Mondeuse Blanche. One of the parents is Mondeuse Blanche.
Right. So spinning out of the Syrah, there's white grapes coming out, and I guess like a a Noir, a Gris, and a Blanc is where that ends up.
Yep. Yep.
And which varieties seem to be excelling as far as thriving on that property? I mean, Grenache Blanc thrives at Talbot's Creek. It grows like crazy and it loves it there. It's clear. It's a much more simplistic way to look at the varieties. The Prennes and Haas's brought from Chateauneuf and planted in at Talbot's Creek. Some of them have excelled. Grenache Blanc's excelled. Roussan struggles. But
Roussan is brutal. Roussan is a brutal grape.
it's so good though when it's good.
Yeah. Yep. Great elsewhere is not a reason to grow it because you love something is necessary but not sufficient criterion for growing it. I think you got to love it, but in loving it is not necessarily enough.
And that's where I've fallen on Pinot Noir. Is I'm not going to try and make it or grow it. I'm going to try and do well enough in my life to buy other people's.
There you go. There you go.
Buy some Burgundy and enjoy that if I can. So, how much One Day Will Be Wine's vineyard is in the ground on this property?
Well, I'm hoping that one day, when it's all planted out, we'll be producing around 6,000 to 7,000 cases, if all goes well.
But where are you now? How far down the road are you?
Well, this year we will probably harvest. I'm hoping we'll harvest about 6 or 7 tons of Grenache Blanc and Gris this year, maybe 2 tons of Pinot Noir, maybe a little Rouquet. So we'll probably get about 7 or 8 tons this year, which is not a lot, but it's not nothing.
No, it's not nothing. And as far as the new propagations go, where does that sit? Are they in greenhouses or probably not if you got COVID?
They're in different places. I'm changing my methodology. We took the seedlings. We had the seeds grown up in a nursery in Sacramento, which was fine. But then I made the mistake of planting them out in the vineyard directly, which was not a great idea because gophers really love seedlings. So we just, the mortality of these delicate plants was just brutal. So what we're doing is we're actually growing them in bins for a year. We're going to just grow them out in bins and observe which ones thrive and which ones are the healthiest, and then figure out what to do a year from now. Maybe plant them out directly in the field rather than going through a nursery. I think we can save a step that way.
And are you going? I mean, you talked about Syrah. Are you doing the same thing with multiple varieties? Are you making the same propagations off of Grenache Blanc and perhaps more?
The only one that's I'd love to do more because I think it's a really interesting technique. Especially here's a way of thinking about it, Neil, that I think is interesting. Every variety at one point in its life had a rationale for being. People loved it. It did well in a site, and then things happen. Good things happen, bad things happen. In Burgundy, good things happen because there was a lot of money and time and effort expended into refining that particular variety on that particular site. The monks had a lot of time on their hands and resource. In many other areas of the world, there was no resource, and varieties languished. They were not selected well. They developed virus. They had other issues, and so the quality diminished. They were not as I said, they were not selected well, and so the originality, the genius of that particular grape variety was lost. So, for example, there's a grape called Rossese, which I think is, or in France they call it Tibourin. It's a problematic grape. The biggest problem I think is virus. There's no clean Tibourin out there, and because it has virus, it doesn't set very well. It doesn't ripen very evenly. It's a pain in the butt. I mean, it's frankly just a pain in the butt. But if you can master it, it produces really great wine. So it turns out when you do self crosses, seedlings, the virus is not transmitted from the vine into the seed. So you lose the virus. So it's an opportunity to actually recapture the original vitality of the grape in the next generation. And the other thing is, some varieties were selected for yield and production, and this is an opportunity to kind of reselect, and go back pick the smaller clusters. Don't pick the big clusters. Pick the more intensely flavored ones. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to. It's like another chance at
Mhm.
giving the variety another chance in its evolution, an alternate path, if you will.
Absolutely, that's a kind of a good segue for me. You know, we're seeing the same thing. Before I go to this, I want to tell you this: the white wine is beautiful. It's very very pure to me. The flavors and the acidity, it's just super pretty. I really like it. The texture, the feel of it, the purity is exceptional in my mind. So, you know, at Tablas they brought in the obvious ones to begin with, and then we started bringing in the less obvious varieties of Chateauneuf. And we're going to go to the Vaccarès here
I'm very excited about this, by the way.
because it seems like a similar mindset. You know, the Syrah, the Mourvedre, the Grenache, the Sanso and Cunoise to a degree, they continued and carried on. But people forgot about the Vaccarès, the Muscadin, the Terre Noir. They were varieties that, for one reason or another, perhaps, and I think I'm finding out what those reasons might be as we're getting into this, but they got left behind. And so Jason did some research on the wine we're about to test, Vaccarès, and realized that we are perhaps the only producer of a single varietal Vaccarès in the world, with the exception of Domaine Fine Roche, which in Chateauneuf, who occasionally do one. But I'm finding it to be really intriguing, you know. And to speak to your point, I'm also finding out that the thing that loves it perhaps more than I do is mildew in the vineyard. It's incredibly susceptible. So there you start to realize maybe that's why they dropped it.
Yep.
You know, it's good, but every year, you know, and in a time where they perhaps didn't have the equipment and the knowledge we do now, there was no way to fight it successfully or easily, and the other varieties didn't get it. So maybe that's part of that evolution, which didn't necessarily do us a favor, but you can see their point. And this is the first vintage of this wine for us. Picked from the same block as the Bourbon. They went in the ground at the same time. This is a bit more vigorous and a bit more giving than the Bourbon, but has really, really dark color, has really pretty acidity, great tannic structure, I think, and good fruit.
These are head trained vines?
No, these are on a trellis. They're irrigated. It's kind of a propagation block. So when we bring in a new variety, so these came right out of the Davis cleanup. You know, this was in quarantine at Davis for a decade or something like that. And so we bring 1,000 vines to the property and plant a propagation block, play with it, see how we like it, and figure out what we're going to do with it, you know, before we plant too much. And to be honest with you, thus far, this is not one that we've put in the ground that I don't see value in. I mean, maybe the most awkward of the lot is Terre Noir, which, you know, as we're talking about this subject, the problem they probably gave up on that is because it has no color. It looks like a rosé, and not a very pretty rosé at that. And it has incredible structure. So it's kind of tannic and pink, has interesting aromas. It's kind of spicy and mineral, but it's not an easy grape. You know, it's not a crowd pleaser. I love it. I think it's great. I may be the most fond of it at Talbot's Creek, perhaps. But you can see why when people were making selections, they go, we're going to plant Terre Noir or we're going to plant Syrah. It was an obvious choice to them. But it's great to see them here doing what they do in our soil, because as much as Talbot's Creek was a project that was, let's do what they do at Chateau de Beaucastel, but here, and we're going to plant the same things and we're going to treat them the same way. It's not the same thing. You know, what we see, Picpoul being a big, you know, this is a great grape for Talbot's Creek, and they don't revere it quite so highly over there, you know. So you can do your best to try, back to what you're saying, you can try and copy, but you're going to get surprised. You know, the things that you thought were going to do well may not do so well, and the ones that you didn't may shine.
Yep.
I mean, who thought Vermentino would do well in Paso Robles? I wouldn't have thought so, but it does. Yeah.
Vermentino is brilliant. Really, it's a brilliant grape.
And that's something. I was visiting South France a couple of years ago, and the Southern Rhone are embracing that more and more because it does do well in a little more heat. It holds great acidity. So, what do you think of the Vaccarès? Give us the Randall Grahm Rhone Ranger rundown.
I like the pepperiness of it. There's definitely some rotundone action going on, which is nice. Minty. I just glanced at notes. There's maybe a little tobacco quality. Juniper is nice. I'd like to see maybe just a little more middle palate to it, just a little more fatness in the middle.
I think
a bit angular.
We just put the 2020 blend together today, strangely, and it has a little more of that middle palate. I agree with you. This has the austerity a little bit like the Terre Noir does. But again, we're talking, this is the first vintage off a new vineyard, so it's just super exciting to me to see these things and not know what you're going to get, because we asked the friends, what does Vaccarès give you? And they don't make a varietal Vaccarès. It goes into something else. There's probably 6 grapevines out there. Who knows? But it's really exciting. And to hear what you're doing, it's a whole nother level. I mean, to start propagating and making wines off of things that you don't even know what they are. You just know they're a derivative of a grapevine that you knew. That's just exciting. When do you foresee a first bottle of, it'll be in a demi-jaune for sure. So at least you're an expert on demi-jaune fermentation, which would be useful.
Well, there's demi-jaune fermentation. There's demi-jaune élevage. So I think you need to get about half a ton of fruit to make maybe 400 pounds. I think you need about 400 pounds to make a proper red wine. Anything less than that is you're fooling yourself. So when we get 400 pounds, we'll be there. That's going to be about 4 or 5 years from now.
Wow, it's always a wait for this stuff, huh?
This is actually really opening up with a little air. I think the air really is friendly to this wine.
It's a tightly wound grape. It really is, but it's going to be fun for blending. It actually, probably breaking some rules here, but it actually made it into the Esprit in 2020 this week, which I'm really excited about. The Esprit hasn't changed in I don't know how long, but this year it did. It got a little Vaccarès, which is cool.
You know what I like about this wine is the licorice. To me, licorice is a sign that everything is in order, cosmic order and balance.
It's the thing, Randall, that when I go and taste the foudres with Claude at Beaucastel, and some of those foudres have this melted black licorice character to them, that it's just a hallmark that we rarely see at Tables for sure, and we do occasionally get it, and it's the hallmark of something great to me in what we do.
Yeah, it's balance. You find it in different varieties, and even in Cabernet, Syrah, and Nebbiolo sometimes, and it's an indication that everything is reached this kind of cusp of perfect balance. It's kind of on this inflection point.
For the longest time, I was convinced it was because they do that flash heating chauffage there, but then it popped up in a couple of our lots in a couple of years, and I realized it's not that. It's something else, and I wish I could get it every year, but I can't. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I'm.
They still do the chauffage?
No, we don't do that.
No. Does Beaucastel still do chauffage?
Yeah. I don't think. Well, maybe they'll give it up. They wouldn't tell me if they did. But yeah, they do. And I don't know whether they're still the only ones, but they were. Ryan Pease, Vaccarès has a moody quality like blood orange, iron and blood sausage. There you go. Ryan Pease makes Mourvedre. I don't know if you've met Ryan. He's Pacer, Terre, and Paso Robles. He makes a lovely Mourvedre and a bunch of other stuff too.
Chauffage is just heating the must.
A flash heating. They heat the must to 180 degrees or such for a moment, and then they cool it back down on the way to the fermenter. I think the theory being that it breaks down the skins a little bit and extracts a little more color, and also kills off some of the less desirable yeasts and bacteria. But I don't know that, if my honest opinion is, I don't really know that they know exactly what that does. I think it has effects, because there is difference. When I was lucky enough to work there for a year, we had a tank with and a tank without, and there were definite differences. I don't know that I would say I liked one more than the other, but it's one of those intangibles that they've done. I mean, their father used to. There was pictures of him stirring grape must in copper cauldrons. That wasn't flash heating. That was something different. But anyway, it's been unique to Pokestell for many, many years. So let's try I'm going with the red capsule. Randall, the unmarked bottles, unlabeled, mystery. Could be anything. So what are we drinking in this?
This is 2015 Grenache from Populachum, from a unique clone of Grenache. It was a Samsonite importation, if you will. It was fermented in a plastic food grade garbage can, not very large, and aged in a 15-gallon barrel. Everyone knows you should never age Grenache in cooperage, ever, ever, ever. But we did, and I think this wine is. I hope your bottle is as interesting as it can be.
How many bottles were there? How much did you bottle here?
As I said, 15 gallons.
Oh, yeah. So we are honored to be able to taste this. Thank you. That's incredibly generous. I did not know that it was so rare.
It's pretty rare.
It's lovely. It's very savory. It's not flamboyant Grenache.
This is an example of what Grenache can do, of the elegant side of Grenache. I think Grenache can have a very beautiful, almost Pinot Noir, Burgundian aspect, and I think that's the style that I accidentally hit on with this particular wine. So
I struggle with Grenache a lot, and you're right. I think it took me a while to realize is the Grenaches that I really like are the lighter, more elegant ones. And there's some ladies doing an incredible job down in Los Olivos and Los Alamos, tribute to Grace and Story of Soil and Casa Dumets and etc. And Molly Lomborg up here at Altaclean that does a carbonic, which is really pretty. And I was always kind of leaning towards the Gigondas style, and I do love that. I do love the wines with Gigondas probably as much as any wine anywhere. But to taste the pretty, almost Pinot-esque wine Grenaches with a little stem, et cetera, so beautiful. It can be such an elegant grape, which I don't think I realized that.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that as well. I think the problem is, I don't know whether it's macho culture or just the fact that the wine business is so competitive, but winemakers often have this feeling that they need to get more out of their wine. Their wines need to be bigger and they need to be more extracted. And I think often that's a path, that's the incorrect path. I think less is sometimes more, and elegance. In other words, if somebody were to say to me, Randall, what is the secret for making great wine? I would say very simply, start with perfect grapes. Start with the best possible grapes you can, and then be as absolutely gentle as possible in the extraction thereof. So make your investment in the vineyard, not in the winemaking. The winemaking, I think, your opportunity is to mess things up, screw things up, but the vineyard is where the ultimate quality is determined. And I think as a gentle extraction is the path to elegance.
Yeah, I've come to similar realization, I guess, but cooler ferments and a more delicate touch, and tasting these new, and maybe that's a bit of the evolution of our winemaking in California. Is there are people doing things a little differently, and the Grenache is a great illustration of that to me. I particularly reference Angela from Tribute to Grace because the first time I tasted her wines, I really didn't like them at all. I thought they were too light and a bit too stemmy and yada yada, and it wasn't the Grenache. Well, this isn't really Grenache, and more they grew on me. And then I went and visited with her and felt a little more what she was doing and realized that, it's a good path. There's a delicacy that we need to embrace a little more. You're right. I mean, I guess I grew up in an era of winemaking where extraction was a big thing. You cold soak it forever and you get as much out of it as you can. And I don't think that's the right solution always. For some things, certainly it is, and for some people, it's the right thing. But I think a delicate hand is making prettier wines, and it goes back to Pinot Noir, right? The people that make great Pinot Noir already knew that. I think. But this is lovely. I love the savory, and I'm again honored to taste some early wines off of that property.
These were harvested from nursery rows, one bunch per vine.
It's a low yielding vineyard.
Pretty low yielding vineyard.
You're not retiring on that.
Sorry?
You're not retiring on the profits from that.
Not so much.
So what do you think of the wine? What's your takeaway? When you taste this, what do you think? Okay, this is what I need to do differently.
As I said, the winemaking was dreadful. This is ultra bad winemaking, ultra bad, ultra inappropriate winemaking. I would never make wine this way, but I did, and it just showed me that it's the vineyard that has the genius, not the winemaking. I would, of course, pick more grapes and make a bigger batch and not make it in a garbage can and not age it in a 15-gallon barrel. I would sort of replicate this just on a larger scale, but I love the gentle extraction, and I'm really happy with the wine. I don't know how I would change it particularly.
So
it's a little volatile. I mean, again, it was fermented in a garbage can, so the VA is probably a little higher than normal, but
it tastes lovely to me. We're pushing time on your Friday evening, but when would you anticipate, moderately realistically, that people in the big wide California wine world will be able to buy wines from the Population project?
Possibly as early as the end of this year. We have a few barrels of Grenache Blanc and Gris in the works, so possibly by the end of the year. There's just probably a couple bottles each.
And is there also I'm assuming there's a line of millions of people lining up for your next release. So how would someone even go about trying to get a bottle of this?
I believe there's actually a Population website, and you can sign up for the Population website, or go to the Population website, or go to the Bonnie Doon Vineyard site, which will direct you to the Population site, I think, and sign up for the mailing list.
Perfect.
This whole commerce thing is kind of beyond me, Neil, I have to say.
Yeah, I think you've done right with it. I think you've done well. Is Nicole coming with you on this next ride, or is she staying with Bonnie Doon?
I think she's going to stay with Bonnie Doon, but never knows, of course.
No, she's great.
She's incredible indeed.
Bring her along if you can, I say. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Oh, that's my son again. Wurz Vineyard. Have you ever made Riesling from the Wurz Vineyard?
Many, 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 many years I've made Riesling from the vineyard. Yes. In fact, I made a sparkling Riesling, which you can buy at the Bonnie Doon website. There's we call it Riesling to Live.
Should he buy a couple of tons of Wurz Riesling and play with it? And what would your picking advice be?
Pick it at 21 bricks. That'll be late October. It keeps its acidity very well. I mean, at a certain point, it's going to start to defoliate. So nature will tell you when it's time to pick it. The birds will start eating it. But it's a brilliant vineyard. Produces great wine. A lot of character. Can't recommend it highly enough.
And how
Fantastic.
close is it to you?
20 minutes, about
Yeah.
20 minutes to the very end of the Cienega Valley. So it's a little bit out there, but it's
So
25
that's
minutes.
a two birds with one stone situation right there. Go look at the Warriors Vineyard and come visit the Popul Shum.
Yep.
Which I'm not saying right, but it's going to take me a while to get that correct. Well, Randall, cheers, and thank you so much for doing this. It's, as always, it's great talking to you, and I always leave inspired and confused.
That makes sense. Thanks
Cheers so much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Cheers.
Noir is great. Like, I'm super excited for this to progress and to come up and see what you're doing.
My pleasure.
Good night, sir.
Good night. Cheers.